Welcome to the Navik Gaming Podcast, where it is our mission to explore the business and future of video games. We bring together the industry's brightest builders, investors, and thinkers to keep a pulse on current events, dissect emerging trends in games, share lessons learned, and have a great time. This podcast is also part of Navik's growing ecosystem, which ranges from free and premium research to consulting and advisory services. For more information, visit www.navik.co. This episode is brought to you by our partners at Windwalk. Windwalk builds digital communities and the technologies necessary to accelerate them through their flagship software, Harbor. Harbor is an end-to-end community software that empowers community and marketing teams to delight users, measure success, and grow across an expanding number of digital channels. Harbor is a foundational technology loved by millions of gamers and integrated into the communities of the largest mobile, PC, and Web3 gaming products on the market. To learn more about this flagship product, simply head to harbor.gg or check out the details in the show notes. And with that, let's dive into the episode. Hi, everyone. I'm your host, Aaron Bush, and today's episode has been a long time in the making. This is the final part in our three-part series on Savvy Games Group, the Saudi-backed gaming giant in the making. Now, if you've been listening to our podcast over the past few weeks, you've probably heard the first two parts, which were with Craig and Nick, the co-CEOs of ESL FACEIT Group, and then with Javier, the co-CEO of Scopely. Those were both great conversations and naturally so very different. So I recommend checking them out if you haven't yet. But today we talk with the man himself, Brian Ward. Brian is the CEO of Savvy Games Group and the chief architect of what this emerging gaming-centric holding company is turning into. Today, we're going to spend a good amount of time unpacking what Savvy's global ambitions are and how its operating philosophy shapes how it makes decisions and what the business is morphing into. Then we'll spend some time discussing the different components of Savvy's business and how Brian thinks about Savvy's future. So, in short, we'll hit on several topics that I hope will help our industry better understand Savvy's intentions and what its impact will ultimately be. But without further ado, Brian, welcome to the Navik Gaming Podcast.
Thanks, Aaron. Thanks for having me. It's a real pleasure to be here. I hope it hasn't been too long in the making, but I've been looking forward to this, so it's a pleasure to join you.
Awesome. And it's good that we took our time because you've had an exciting year this year and Savvy's been making moves, and we'll get to that in a second. But I thought a good place to start, Brian, would be to just talk about you for a moment. Could you just share your path to becoming the leader of this business and walk us through your games industry journey?
Yes, happy to, Aaron. Thanks a lot. So I started my training as a lawyer. I practiced law for a long time, but I'm okay now. I was in Canada, where I'm from, and I really wanted. This was early days of the internet in the mid '90s. I really wanted to do something at the intersection of technology and entertainment, and that was games. I ended up getting a job at Electronic Arts in Vancouver, at that studio that became a behemoth. It was only 100, became 800 in the 4 years that I was there, and almost half of EA's revenue, all the EA sports stuff. So I had kind of a dual role in business affairs and on the studio leadership team. Really fell in love with the product side. Went to Microsoft for a couple of years after the launch of the first Xbox to a strictly product-related role in studios under Shane Kim. Got recruited by Activision in 2004, went there when it was about $1 billion in revenue and 6 studios. And a year and a half later, they asked me to run worldwide studios. We'd acquired another 5 by that time, I guess, and another 6 in another year and a half. So got up to 17 studios and quadrupled revenue in 4 years. Had a great run there until 2012. That was also during the time the company acquired Vivendi Games and the Blizzard unit. And then I went out on my own for a while, making real money games, mobile games for the real money side of our business, or cousins, I guess, to our business. And after 8 or 9 years, just prior to COVID, I thought, you know what, I really missed the traditional games business, and was looking at, very fortunate at EA to have been part of what was then the largest development studio in the world. Lucky at Activision to have been part of building number one AAA publisher. Wanted another similar sized crack, if you like, at something great in the industry. And when this opportunity came up, I thought, well, this sounds, it has a lot of components to it that are fitting what I'm looking for. So I've been here a couple of years now.
Wow. Yeah. What an amazing opportunity, too. And when I look at your past couple of jobs, I can see from a high level, at least some of the relevant experiences you have gained over the years. You've managed large budgets. You've overseen studios with offices around the world. You've conducted multiple studio acquisitions. You've lobbied and worked with governments, et cetera. Could you share a couple of tactical lessons you've learned over the years that best prepared you for this unique job with Savvy?
Yeah, I can. I think a couple of things come to mind. One is I started my career as a lawyer. I'm familiar with a lot of things related to government. And in fact, in my legal career, I think the very first job I had out of law school was working for a government agency in Canada. And so how that's been helpful in Savvy is, as you and your listeners will know, Savvy's owned 100% by the PIF here in Saudi Arabia, the Sovereign Wealth Fund, which of course, manages public funds for the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. So having a government experience both early in my career and also when I was doing the lottery stuff from 2012, 2019, where we were essentially partnered with various governments across America and even around the world, was very helpful in coming here and understanding how things can be different when you have a government or government-oriented stakeholder. And secondly, I would say probably the best piece of advice I got in my career was very early on at EA, where essentially the advice was don't spend too much time thinking about how you're going to set things up, the organizational design, all the governance, the policies, how big the team's going to be, and sort of all the foundational stuff. Get your line in the water and catch some fish. And so when I came here, I told our vice chairman that's exactly what I was going to do. We were going to try and put some points on the board and get Savvy up and running as quickly as possible. I'm glad in hindsight that we focused on that, because we were able to, with that sort of idea, we were able to capture ESL FACEIT early on. We were able to close a number of deals in our first year, as opposed to focusing more on housekeeping items and building infrastructure and so forth that would have caused us, I think, to miss some great opportunities.
Gotcha. Well, thank you for sharing that, and we'll spend much of the interview later talking about the individual opportunities that you have seen and captured so far, such as with ESL FACEIT and with Scopely. But before going further, let's make sure to cover our bases. And to start, Brian, could you just share what is Savvy Games Group's mission, and at a high level, what really are the main components of the business today?
Yes, Savvy's mandate is to build a global global leading games and esports company, both through building its own capabilities and investing in other great teams across a wide spectrum of gaming verticals and esports businesses, and secondarily to lead the effort in the kingdom to build Saudi Arabia into the next great global games and esports hub worldwide.
Gotcha. And in my interview with Javier a couple weeks ago, he said that Savvy aims to be the largest games company in the world. And maybe that's not like what you officially, put on your website, but it just highlights the large ambitions that you really have behind the scenes and how you think about your future. But I just wanted to ask, like, why is that the right goal that you are thinking internally? And what are the broad strokes of how you even think that large of an ambition can be pulled off?
Well, I think a couple of things. So that is the right vision. It's not my vision. It's the vision of His Royal Highness the Crown Prince, the board, the PIF, our stakeholder, and all under the rubric of Vision 2030, which of course is the national strategy and roadmap for the transformation of Saudi Arabia. which is an amazing thing that really all your listeners should learn about and even see firsthand if they can. And so it's a very large ambition to be number one global games and esports company. It's almost a ridiculously audacious objective, but everything here is supersized in terms of ambition and effort towards transforming the kingdom in very positive ways. And and this can be done. There are other countries that punch far above their weight in our sector. Canada is a global games hub of some renown. You wouldn't think it from the size of the population, frankly, but some very smart policy making 30 years ago led to the creation of over 34,000 jobs or something or other, and 300, 400 some companies. So the kingdom's ambition to have 250 games companies and 39,000 video games and esports jobs, with a population about the same as Canada's, frankly, is an achievable but challenging objective.
Mm-hmm. And what are the broad strokes of how that can be pulled off, you think? Obviously, Savvy has made outsized acquisitions. It's made investments. It's seeding at least one studio that I know of. So I know you have your hands in different opportunities, but can you maybe just frame up like how you think how that large of an aspiration can really be achieved when you kind of put the strategy into operations?
Sure. And I think I didn't answer part of a previous question, so I'll do both at the same time. So we started as a holding company at the parent company level with 5 operating companies underneath. One developing and opening gaming venues here in the kingdom. A second one with a mobile game studio with console ambitions down the line. A third company called 966 focused on the ecosystem building efforts here in Saudi Arabia, along with other stakeholders, and esports ambition, which we've fulfilled with ESL FACEIT, and then a separate company where the capital was meant to sit to fuel all these activities. We've since simplified things a little bit and focused more on having business units rather than separate companies doing these things around 3 strategic pillars. So the first of those is esports, which is obviously our ESL FACEIT group, which was ESL, FACEIT combined in the beginning, and then more laterally, a few months ago, Vindex. And then secondly, the KSA ecosystem building exercise, which I'm sure we'll talk about in some depth in a couple of minutes, building Saudi into a global games hub, games and esports hub. And then thirdly, game development and publishing, for which we've made a very exciting investment into acquiring Scopely, and that's our pillar in that under that pillar at the moment. So I'm not sure. Actually, I think I answered your previous question and not the question you just asked me, but.
Yes, that was good. You brought it all back together. You also mentioned before that Savvy is, of course, fully owned and funded by Saudi Arabia's Public Investment Fund. I was just curious to know, like, what does that relationship operationally look like? Like, how does Savvy actually engage with or plan with Saudi Arabia's leadership, including the chairman and Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman?
Yeah, so this ambition is being fulfilled by a very super strong commitment from the PIF. I think I was told at the time that Savvy received the largest initial injection of capital of any portfolio company project in the PIF's 51-year history. Wow. But more than capital, it's a commitment right from the top of the house, from His Royal Highness, who's our chair. The PIF is a full partner in all of our activities, really has been from the very outset. I was the very first employee, and for a long time, I was the only employee working with the MENA division of the PIF. They're split into international and MENA. And the MENA working group really provide just tremendous investment and operational support. Still do. We operate as one team. So they're very operationally involved and oriented, and then super supportive in helping us frame up our strategy and other long-term elements of our vision. So we have a 7-member board chaired by His Royal Highness. Our vice chair is His Royal Highness Prince Faisal, who's also chair of the local, regional, and I think he's now co-chair or vice chair of both global esports federations. Also responsible for the national strategy on games and esports. We have other board members, of course, comprising the other five, and then we have an executive committee that comprises 6 people, probably half from the PIF and some others. We're a fully commercial, a fully independent commercial entity, just like any other company, just except we have one shareholder, and that shareholder really provides a lot of operational and strategic support.
Okay, that's helpful to understand, and we'll get to more of the subcomponents of Savvy in a minute. But before we do that, I want to unpack a bit more your operating philosophy and your strategy of just like how you view running a holding company like this. And maybe to start here, in terms of performance, there are obviously many good holding companies out there, but there are also many more bad ones. And I'm curious, what other organizations that are holding companies are you inspired by? And like, who have you learned from and or studied from as you build out Savvy? Like, who are sort of like guideposts for you as you think about building out this business?
Yeah, great question, Aaron. So I think there are a few aspects to our operating philosophy. One is, and you will appreciate and probably harbor the same sentiment that we believe, like most people who have been in the industry a long time, that games really are a force for good. There's a lot of benefit, not just entertainment, obviously, but health benefits, educational benefits, and so forth that come from games. And in terms of operating philosophy, when I joined Activision in 2004, the very distributed, decentralized, autonomous, and independent nature of that company, particularly on the studio side, was not really the norm. It was kind of more common to see a top-down orientation towards managing business units like EA at the time. Since then, however, just about everybody has adopted a more independent, autonomous model. And really, that's now sort of part of my sort of core DNA on the operating philosophy side. So we intend to, be not just not a passive investor, an active investor, but aimed at empowering great teams to achieve their best potential. And so, if we can provide strategic long-term capital to great team by way of minority investment or by way of control or controlling positions, and provide them with a long-term runway to achieve an outsized ambition that might not be available to them without our long-term orientation, then we think we're providing something unique to them that is also differentiated from other companies like ours in the industry.
Gotcha. But are there any like organizations that you're inspired by that are
Oh,
other
yeah.
holding companies or such?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, Tencent does an amazing job and has done an amazing job. I mean, it's a behemoth. It's a behemoth that's only 15 years old in games. I might be slightly off on that, but a tremendous record of investing in great companies and empowering great teams. Slightly different orientation than ours, and they're not probably as operationally broad as we are across the different verticals that I described earlier. But fantastic. I learned. I've been so fortunate to have spent time at Activision and at Microsoft and at Electronic Arts. Essentially, my entire career in this industry has been working with other great people who have been tremendously successful. So I've taken inspiration from all of those teams that I've had the good fortune to work with, and I think they've all done obviously they've done amazing things because they're all leaders.
Okay, great. And it's obviously been reported that Savvy is planning to invest $38 billion through 2030. Could you walk me through your capital allocation framework? First of all, how would you describe that framework? And second, what are the zones that you are generally focused on within that?
Yeah, when we started, the mandate of the fund where all the capital sat had a couple of different components to it. One, it was intended to make direct investments, both of a minority nature and majority or controlling position nature. Secondly, also intending, and we did, make some indirect investments as a limited partner. in venture capital or private equity firms. And then thirdly, the orientation was also, or the expectation was that the investments that the PIF had made independently out of its international group, so the different group than the group that gave birth to Savvy, in companies like Nintendo and Capcom and Nexon and Activision, EA, Take-Two, et cetera. I think there's 8 of those altogether that the PIF invested in, independent of Savvy, purely for financial returns purposes, that those investments would fold into Savvy, and we would manage those positions and operationalize those relationships at some future point. I think that's still the expectation, but that hasn't occurred yet. And so now we're oriented around those 3 pillars that I described earlier: esports, KSA ecosystem building, and games development and publishing. And frankly, I think with the acquisition of ESL, FACEIT, and more laterally Vindex, I think we probably deployed as much capital, for the time being as we're going to. I'm not saying we're never going to invest in esports again. I think that I wouldn't say that, but we are now focused on esports in first of all, managing those integrations and making sure we've got operational excellence in those 3 groups. It's no small feat to combine just ESL and FACEIT. Never mind adding Vindex to it just a few months later. And so there's work to do there. There's work to do, which was the initial ambition, in improving the product portfolio across live entertainments, across broadcasting and event production, across the online portion of the business as well. And KSA ecosystem building isn't really an investment exercise. It's an investment in building capabilities in conjunction with other stakeholders, but it requires more time than capital. And so I would expect that most of our future capital deployment would be in the game development and publishing pillar.
Okay, that makes sense. And many companies, including many big companies, invest in gaming. But would you say there's anything uniquely Savvy about the way that you invest or acquire? And maybe you can talk a bit more about how these investment and M&A decisions get made too.
Sure. So I think what our unique selling proposition, if you like, when we're in a competitive situation for an acquisition or making an investment, is the long-term orientation of our business, thanks to the very long-dated patient capital of the PIF. So, and this was the idea at the time of ESL FACEIT as an example. We could see coming out of COVID that there was tremendous engagement across everything that related to, entertaining yourselves indoors under quarantine. And we also thought that there would be, given the fragmented nature of the esports ecosystem, we thought there would be a lot of consolidation. And we thought, okay, well, just about everybody else in the space has a 3 to 5 year time horizon. They're a listed company, or they're a VC or private equity firm with expectations on returning capital to shareholders at some point. We don't have a 3 to 5 year time horizon. We've got a 7, 10, or even 10 plus year time horizon. And we thought we could make strategic decisions based on a longer time horizon that would be attractive to teams like the ones at ESL FACEIT and at Scopely, for instance, who were looking for long-term strategic partners without an orientation towards more short-term. I'm not saying short-term thinking is bad. I'm just saying it's a different orientation we have, given our stakeholders, given who our stakeholder is. And so I think this is the really unique thing that enables us to pitch something slightly different than other potential investors.
Okay. And I will say that has shined through in this interview series. Even I remember a couple of weeks ago talking with Javier, and the long-term orientation of Savvy, he mentioned, was an important piece of why Scopely chose to work with Savvy. And, between that, the high level of ambition to be the largest games company in the world is probably, also helping you be able to retain some of these awesome leaders and keep them excited for the future, which you also don't see it through all acquisitions and holding companies too. So I can see how, that cocktail of factors, leads to unique and interesting outcomes. I also wanted to to ask, many large organizations or funds who are flush with cash or hungry for deal making, like SoftBank's Vision Fund, et cetera, often have made big moves, which can warp an industry or in market. But in hindsight, having too much capital was often detrimental to returns. I'm curious how you think about that dynamic in Savvy and what you and the team are doing to ensure that that type of outcome is not the case in your situation.
Yeah, well, hopefully it won't be the case. We'll do our best to make sure that isn't the case. I think it comes back to the fact that we've got a single shareholder. That single shareholder is a sovereign wealth fund. That sovereign wealth fund is managing essentially public money. And this is money that belongs to the people of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. And there are a lot of checks and balances in place with our shareholder to ensure that we are thoughtful in our strategy. We're thoughtful and very diligent in pursuing opportunities. We're not in a rush to deploy the rest of the capital. We've got a lot of capital left to deploy, but with a very long time horizon and very patient capital, the PIF is very helpful in ensuring that we are measured in how we're thinking about deploying it, and that we, to the greatest extent possible, make the best decisions.
Okay. And Brian, somewhat selfishly, I'm also curious how leaders like you manage organizations that operate across different regions with different customs, different focuses, time zones, different company cultures, etc. How do you create unity across an organization with so many differences? Or would you say the magic is in how the operations are centralized? What's the case with Savvy?
I think the model in our industry, which has more predominantly become a very independent and autonomous model, is the right one. I think creative teams, generally speaking, are very team oriented towards their local group, their studio, or what have you. And I think to the greatest extent possible, it's our job to get out of the way, to invest in the strategy that is the sound strategy for which you invested in or acquired that unit in the first place, and to empower the people who are executing on that strategy. And hopefully you've been successful in your investment and your M&A activity to attract all of the great people. There are some examples in our industry where the teams did not come over, or they came over and didn't stay. And generally speaking, those don't work out very well. And so our job is to make sure that we are very clear about our intention in investing in the strategy and continuing the path of success that the company or the business or unit or studio is on, providing that continuity and following through with what we said, and helping them formulate a roadmap that builds upon and amplifies their ambition over a long period of time.
Gotcha. I just have a couple more questions before we dive more into the details of the individual units. First, could you help us envision what you want the final product of Savvy to look like after most of the capital has been deployed? You've hit on this a little bit, but I just kind of wanted to ask it directly. Like, let's say the year is 2033, 10 years from now. How do you think Savvy looks and works differently compared to today?
Okay. Do you know how old I'm going to be in 2033, by the way? I'm not going to tell you, but
I don't.
Well, that's probably good. So I will tell you that, okay, let's say it's 2033. So 3 years after, Vision 2030 comes to fruition in most of its respects across all of the elements of that strategy. So what would Savvy look like in 2033? Well, we will be a global games leader in investing in great teams and enabling great teams to continue, aiming towards an outsized ambition that might not have been possible without our long-dated and patient capital and support. We will have largely stayed out of the way of those entities and allowed them continue to build their business and build their teams build upon the culture that they've successfully instilled in their people. We don't want to mess with any of that. We want to provide continuity to the greatest extent possible. We will have built Riyadh, Qiddiya, and help build Neom and maybe even Jeddah into a great powerhouse of games and esports activity, and have created thousands and thousands of jobs. Hopefully 39,000, because that's actually the magic number. And we will continue to build upon on the esports side. I think. Move beyond this sort of fragmented ecosystem into one where hopefully we're a dominant player, and through long-term investing in building the product quality and the operational excellence of the teams executing on the product vision, as well as broadening the appeal of esports outside of its fairly niche, esports enthusiast, gamer enthusiast audience that it is today. And if we can improve that audience breadth and its appeal, we think we can monetize that sector better. As you know, engagement in esports is off the charts. Monetization is kind of off the charts in the opposite direction, and we think we can help improve that. And then, let me stop there. I think that would be a pretty satisfying end state.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. And I have a bunch of follow-ups to several of the pieces that you said in there that I'll get to in just a moment. But really the final question of this section that I wanted to ask is, most of the games industry, both the insiders, executives, and also players, are not used to a Saudi-based business being a key mover and shaker in the games industry. So, I just wanted to ask, what do you feel is misunderstood or any misconceptions about running a Saudi-based business that the rest of the world would be better off knowing?
Well, I think that's a great question. And 2 years ago, my answer would have been a little different than it is today, I think. But I think a lot of those, what I would say, misconceptions about Saudi Arabia have largely evaporated in the 2 years that I've been here. And I don't get very many questions about Saudi anymore, to be honest, or what is it like there, or kind of this like video games, Saudi Arabia, how's that going to work? People are sort of beyond that, because a lot of people have visited here. A lot of people have read about the ambition of the kingdom in games and esports. A lot of people read about the announcement and the early stages of the national strategy on games and esports. So get more sort of operational questions around, okay, what is it like to do business there? How do we come there and publish there? How do we come and set up a studio there? And a lot less around. And I would say this 2 years ago was probably the transformation of the kingdom in all respects, not just in games and esports, but the society itself, and all of the investment and expansion in industrial sectors under Vision 2030. The pace of this, Aaron, is astonishing from a Westerner's perspective. I mean, this is the most astonishing transformation of a country on the planet in 35 years, in my estimation. And I think people are starting to get the idea that there's a lot going on here, and it's happening at a rapid pace. And people just needed a little bit of time to sort of catch up.
Okay. That sounds exciting. And I would love to visit and see it for myself too. But thanks for answering that. But okay, we kind of talked high level about a bunch of savvy-oriented points. Let's go ahead and really spend the rest of this conversation kind of digging into a bit more of the specifics of the businesses that you own and how you view their futures. And I actually wanted to start here more talking about the MENA region. This is something that we've kind of been dancing around. You said, you want several cities to kind of turn more into games hubs, create 39,000 jobs, and really just make Saudi Arabia more of a major hub in the world for esports and gaming at large. And 966, one of your businesses, is a big part of making that happen from what I can tell from the outside. But I just wanted to give you the floor to kind of talk a bit more about like what exactly Savvy is doing to move the needle in that direction, and how any of your specific subsidiaries in particular are kind of taking outsized roles and making that happen? What does that look like?
So, with regard to MENA region, this is really the remit of 966. Right? 966 exists in order to help realize the full potential of this market, which has more. There are more active gamers in MENA than there are in Western Europe or America. People don't know that. It's also, I think, the second largest growing region globally in our industry after LATAM, and highly monetizable. I mean, people spend a lot of money, and a very young, educated, tech savvy demographic that's very, very, very knowledgeable about games. I mean, they're in love with games. They know a lot about games, and what is it? 70% of the people in Saudi Arabia are under the age of 35. 68% identify as gamers. Aaron, as you know, a lot of people who play games on mobile phones don't necessarily self-identify as a gamer.
Right.
But for 68% of the population to self-identify as a gamer is an extraordinarily high percentage. So 966's job is to essentially do three things. One, work with government ministries and other stakeholders to develop the sorts of incentives and programs that would attract foreign investment. So companies that might want to come here, set up a studio or some other facility, maybe it's QA, maybe it's localization, maybe it's some other outsourcing, bring leadership, and then hire local people. Because no matter how much capital we have to deploy, Savvy can't build the KSA ecosystem all by itself. We need other people to come into the kingdom to help us do that, other great companies from around the industry. And so this, you wouldn't normally, as a commercial entity, invite your competitors to come into your home market. But this, in fact, is our mandate to do this. The second thing 966 does is work with stakeholders, again, sometimes government-oriented stakeholders, but sometimes not, to develop essentially incubation and acceleration and then follow-on support programs for local entrepreneurs who might want to start a studio or some other gaming entity. And there's a lot of enthusiasm for entrepreneurship, generally speaking, in the kingdom across all sectors under Vision 2030 as a much more entrepreneurial place than it was, say, 10 years ago. At least this is what I'm told. And there's high enthusiasm for our sector. So there's a lot of people who want to, try and develop something in it. And that's our job to try and support those people. And then thirdly, training and development. You can't take people out of university and make them an executive producer overnight. You need to train them up and develop them. And you need to have vocational programs. You need to have academic programs. You need to have a lot of support from both educational institutions and other commercial partners who are well versed in developing talent in other jurisdictions to come here and help train up a very sort of ready-made market of people who just don't have the experience, but they have everything else.
Cool. That's a really interesting answer. I also, somewhat tangentially, was just going to ask, why do you think the government cares so much about gaming specifically? And I just ask because it's unique compared to the rest of the world. If you look at, other very developed regions, whether it's the US, Europe, the government's not really thinking about gaming. If you look at somewhere like China, if anything, the government's been more hostile to gaming. Obviously, it's a growth market. It's, an important growing branch of entertainment. But why care so much about gaming?
Well, I think it boils down to Vision 2030. So Vision 2030 is the strategy and blueprint for transforming the country and diversifying the economy away from oil and gas, which just by itself seems like a pretty good idea, to be honest.
Right.
And providing more opportunities for women and in investing in 13 industrial sectors. One of those 13 is entertainment. What's the biggest part of entertainment? Games, by a country mile. We're bigger than film and TV and music all put together now. So that's part of it. Also, leadership, like the rest of this country, is very young here. And there are avid gamers amongst the most senior people in the country. And so I think there's a natural affinity for our sector and a great deal of knowledge about our sector, not just about the products, but about how our business works, about the opportunity that it provides to young people in the places where there are global hubs, and about the values and culture of our industry, which are part of the transformation of the kingdom. So I think those are the two components of the answer.
Okay, that's really interesting, especially the affinity point from a group of younger leaders. I do think that is pretty unique.
I mean, Aaron, this is the only country on the planet that has a national strategy for games and esports.
Yeah, it's very, very unique. Hence my many questions about it. It's very, very interesting to unpack. I wanted to kind of switch gears to talk a bit about Scopely, which of course is the biggest piece of news from this past year, and Savvy, but also I think is the largest part of your business now. Although you can correct me if that's not the case. But I just wanted to ask at a high level, why acquire Scopely, especially at a time when mobile at large has faced major structural setbacks? Like in your mind, like what was so special about them to make that large of a move when much of the market had gone pretty silent from an M&A front?
Well, first of all, if you're going to be a global leader or the global leader in games and esports, you can't ignore mobile or companies that are mobile first. And I wouldn't call Scopely a mobile company. They're really a free to play live services company that's mobile first, but with cross platform capabilities and ambitions, and a fairly significant web and PC presence already, with console coming next year. So they're a live services company that's mobile first, not a mobile company. But
Right.
they were the last company of that type that was independent and scaled. And then two other things. They've got a large number of franchises. They're not dependent on one thing. I mean, Monopoly Go has been a runaway success in the last 6 months, but they've got 12 franchises that have done over $100 million in lifetime revenue. They've got six that have done over $500 million in lifetime revenue. So they're not a one trick pony. And they've got the Playgammy platform, which is the platform for monetization and player retention and engagement. So those were the real reasons.
Okay, and if you're listening to this episode, I do recommend checking out that interview with Javier. He did a great job. Just scroll back in your feed about 2-3 weeks, and it'll be there. But I highly recommend checking it out. Brian, Javier also mentioned how post acquisition, not much has changed in the way of how Scopely operates, which gets to the point you're making earlier about providing some autonomy to enable creativity. But he also did point out that Savvy's, capital does enable the business to potentially expand into new opportunities that it might not have been able to do on its own, at least as easily otherwise. How important was was that part of it? Scopely becoming more than something than what it is today or was at the time to to the acquisition that Savvy made.
Well, I think if I'm, to be really frank about it, they didn't need our capital to get from their run rate, which was maybe, $1.5 billion top line run rate at the time of the deal signing. They didn't need our help to double that and get to 3 billion under any circumstances. What they probably needed was long term strategic capital to get to 9 or 10 billion.
Hmm.
And I remember a slide in the management presentation that talked about their long term ambition that was very inspiring and very exciting. And so we thought if we can help provide what they need in that respect to get to an exponentially larger outcome 10 years from now, then that's exactly right up our alley. And that's something we should be doing. And if we can, and a very young, super capable leadership team and great people across the country, across the company rather. And if we can attract all of those people and provide a longer term runway for for them to fulfill their ambitions in building a legacy business, the same sort of ambition the leadership team had at ESL FACEIT, to be honest, wanting to stay for the long term and build something really meaningful as a legacy. Then this was, something that was really attractive to us. You're right that Scopely is the biggest part of our company. I think we're 30 overall in Savvy. I think we're 3,500 people roughly around the world in 22 countries. Scopely would be about 2,300 of those people.
Okay. And I'm curious what your day to day looks like when it comes to working with the leaders of these organizations. When you talk to them, like what type of support do you offer? What do they come to you for? Could you just kind of unpack what that relationship between these units and the holding company, specifically you, looks like?
Yeah, I think our main job is to provide continuity. Provide continuity and don't screw it up, basically. So, and then participate in helping develop a long-term strategic roadmap that is consistent with their current strategy and the success that they've had over numerous years. My job is to figure out how to solve. My entire job is solving problems. So how to solve problems that they might have that maybe they're capital related. We haven't encountered any of those, but they could be, or maybe they're related to long-term strategic planning. Maybe they're related to our ownership and the expectations of our stakeholder. There's a lot of interpretation we do here at Savvy between the stakeholder and the business units, because it's different. It's different having a sovereign wealth fund as your sole shareholder. Everybody works extremely well together. We've had a tremendously successful trip out to California with senior people from our shareholder. So that's kind of my job. Is I feel like I'm kind of an interpreter and helping make sure that everybody sort of remains on the same page, that we provide continuity, and that we are consistent in helping them advance their long-term strategic direction.
Okay, sounds good. We talked about Scopely for a minute. You mentioned ESL FACEIT, and I also had a great conversation with Craig and Nick there. And one of the notable takeaways for me from that conversation was how the subsidiaries' aspirations, similarly to Scopely, expanded as a result of merging together and becoming a more multifaceted esports ecosystem facilitated by Savvy. But considering the sustainability-driven reset that esports is going through, like we've seen FaZe Clan sell for much less than it was. We're seeing the Overwatch League shut down, and the list is a pretty long one of how esports is currently being reset. On one hand, that conversation with ESL FACEIT, it made me realize, like, wow, this ecosystem is actually coming together in a pretty unique and interesting way that hasn't really been seen before in esports, and maybe is a noteworthy zag while the industry is going in this direction. But I wanted to get your view of why focus so heavily on esports at a time when esports is going through such a big reset. Is there anything notable about the timing there, or was it just purely about the kind of the business opportunity? And I'll stop there, but I might have a follow up.
Okay, so esports was a very important part of the founding strategy that came out of the PIF and the founding board, and then the board of directors itself. So that was one thing that was clear. And I think if you fast forward 2 years to the recently announced Esports World Cup, having already posted, 2 successful years of Gamers 8, by far the biggest esports events in history. You can sort of see the foundation for why Savvy might have been encouraged to focus on esports, starting a couple of years ago. And of course, as everybody will appreciate, esports has been somewhat separate from games development and games publishing, and publishers for the longest time viewed it as kind of like a nice marketing thing and not much else. And weren't really on side with a lot of the esports operators. A lot of the esports operators had some difficulty scaling because nobody's been able to make consistent profits in the space. And that's not just esports operators, but across the esports ecosystem. And it's also the economic interests in esports are very fragmented between or amongst publishers and operators and teams and media rights holders and so forth. So we thought, well, COVID kind of accelerated adoption or engagement. We thought there would be a lot of consolidation. We thought we could probably participate or lead some of that consolidation. And if we did, we might get to a place where we could provide a different level of services and operational support for the IP holders. And maybe even participate in figuring out better economics for everyone in the ecosystem, from players and teams to publishers to operators.
Great. Well, let's go ahead and keep the conversation moving. I could talk to you all day about any one of these components, but I also wanted to ask about Steer Studios. So from my view, you're not just acquiring existing games companies, but also seeding at least this one from ground zero. So I just wanted to ask, why take this approach? And can you tell us just what can we know about Steer Studios so far?
Steer so far is, I think, around 80 people now, from a standing start of zero 18 months ago. I would say there's 17 different nationalities probably employed amongst those 80 people, almost 30% female participation, which is pretty high for a game development studio. I think our Saudiization target or our Saudiization metric in there is somewhere around 55% or something like that, which will increase over time. We'll probably have 80% Saudis in that studio. Again, the foundation, or forming a studio from scratch was an important component of the strategy that came out of the founding board and the board itself of Savvy. As you will know, there are very, very few scaled games companies that build studios from scratch. Studios get built by teams who spin out from somewhere else, and then they get acquired. And Ubisoft is probably the only scaled operator that's built a number of studios from scratch. Fortunately, we've got some veterans from Ubisoft leading this effort, and are doing a great job in instilling a great games-oriented culture. They've won several awards for best place to work in the last, I think, 6 awards for best place to work in the last year and a half, and are helping train up people in so far casual mobile games, but with some console aspirations down the line. So I don't know that we'll build another studio from scratch here under Savvy, but I think it was a sound idea to take the learnings that we're realizing from Steer and be able to transmit and educate others who are coming into the kingdom about what it's been like to build a studio or an entity here, because we want other people to come here and try the same thing.
Gotcha. Well, it's really interesting to see, and I look forward to following how it goes. I was also asking just because other holding companies in the games industry, it seems like an emerging strategy to start creating new studios elsewhere, kind of in replacement of M&A in certain ways. But obviously, in your case, you still have a lot of capital to deploy, and you have different goals and aspirations around how you build in the region. So I'm just curious to see how that will play out over time. But one final question about these parts of your business, which is really like, is there any other active subsidiaries or projects or strategies that we didn't talk about yet today that you want to highlight and make sure that the audience understands?
No, I think we've hit on the main ones. I mean, we've got these 3 strategic pillars, and we're executing with 966 under the KSA one, EFG, ESL FACEIT group under the esports strategy, and Scopely is our anchor so far in game development and publishing. And we'll hopefully realize some other great opportunities. I would expect it mostly in game development and publishing. We'll be taking into account and following to a certain extent Scopely's strategic lead in this area, because they're experts in that sort of business model as it applies to our business. And I can't think of anything else that might be of interest to your listeners that we haven't touched on.
Okay, sounds good. We've also hit on this question in a couple ways, but just say again, it's 2033, and so you're still looking young. You're still excited about Savvy's future. But at that time, if we were to do a podcast episode then, and we're looking back over the past 10 years of what Savvy's impact on the games industry has been, not just what Savvy has kind of achieved for itself, but like what its impact has been. What would make you happy, than to say like, we did this, we stood for this, we accomplished, X, Y, Z. What impact would you be happy to have achieved?
Great question. If I look young in 2033, that'll be a miracle of modern medical technology. But I would say a couple of things. One, we will be able to say that we created a really robust games and esports industry in Saudi Arabia with thousands of Saudis having well-paying jobs in a sector that they're already naturally very excited and knowledgeable about. That would be huge. I would say, hopefully, we will have figured out a way, not by ourselves, but in conjunction with other people, how to improve the economics for all the participants in the esports space so that we're all happier with the prospects there, to the benefit of everyone, from viewers to players, teams, publishers, etc. And I think on the games development and publishing side, if we're able to say that we made some great investments in excellent teams who were able to realize a longer term ambition that might not have been available to them without our capital and participation, then that would be the trifecta.
Awesome. Well, I hope all of that comes true. It's certainly going to be exciting to watch. As we wrap up here, I wanted to ask you one non-Savvy related question, which is just, what else in the games industry are you excited about? It could be a trend, other companies, games. What has piqued your interest and made you excited about our industry's future?
I think, when I started in this business, I don't know what the sector was worth then, but we thought, man, wouldn't it be awesome if someday we were bigger than the music guys? Wouldn't that be like amazing? And now we're bigger than them in film and somebody else put together. And when I look forward to, I've been asked this question a few times around the impact of AI as an example, and other tools that are, some of which we are on the horizon, some of which we don't even know about yet. That really is super exciting, because I think that provides so much opportunity for expanding the medium and expanding the number of available jobs and the skill sets that provides a lot of not just enjoyment, entertainment to people, but a lot of the number of people who are employed in our industry worldwide and the number of families who depend on our industry for their livelihood is really exciting compared to where we were, say, 20 years ago.
Amazing. Well, let's go ahead and wrap up here. Final question. If anyone wishes to reach out to you or Savvy, either they want to work with you or get to know what you're about in more detail. Hopefully today helped, but if they want to know even more, get in touch. Where should they go?
That's a great question. I should have the answer right at hand. Team, take note. No, I am sure there is something on the website in relation to how people can get a hold of us. And if not, I can assure you that within a day or two, that will be there. And it is not hard to find the people who are leading our HR function, the people who are leading our communications function, and so forth. And so any of those channels would be terrific.
Okay, great. And I will confirm that it is easy to get in touch from the website. That's how I got in touch with you. So that should work out pretty well, I hope. Awesome. Well, Brian, I really sincerely could chat with you all day, but we got to wrap. Thank you again for hopping on today and sharing how Savvy works, how you think, and best of luck in your quest to build out Savvy's future. If you enjoyed today's episode, whether on YouTube or your favorite podcast app, make sure to like, subscribe, comment, or give a 5-star review. And if you want to reach out or provide feedback, shoot us a note at podcast@naavik.co or find us on Twitter and LinkedIn. Plus, if you want to learn more about what Naavik has to offer, make sure to check out our website, www.naavik.co. There, you can sign up for the #1 games industry newsletter, Naavik Digest, or contact us to learn about our wide-ranging consulting and advisory services. Again, that is www.naavik.co. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you in the next episode.